I was a good kid. Mama was mad as if I didn't come home 4 hours before the streetlights came on. Story time. That's just how weird I am. 22,000 miles in 10 years is a whole lot. I still have the original screenshot. All kinds of noise here, huh? Hi, how are you? Hope you got your popcorn ready because you're about to hear or learn what it's like to own your very first car for 10 years. 10:27 a.m. September 11th, 2025 was the official 10-year anniversary of taking ownership of what's behind me in the sheet metal, my very first car, truck, a 2004 Ford Ranger Edge extended cab two-door with the 3.0 liter V6 engine, two-wheel drive. Do a little bit of quick math and we'll have a little bit of a story time all the way back to the summer of 2015. I want you to be, no, but for real. Back then was freshman, sophomore year type shit, so I had zero. But my mom knew the extreme passion, support, and love I had for the Blue Oval because, quick little backstory, my dad has owned since brand new, still has to this day, a 1997 Ford F-150 with the legendary 4.6 liter V8. We took that thing around the galaxy and it's never let us down. So I always knew I wanted a smaller version of the F-150, and at the time, obviously it was the Ford Ranger. So I gathered a small list of about 6 or 7 Ford Rangers that me and my mom took a look at all in one day. This was the best out of the bunch as far as the deal, everything that already came on this truck, the mileage, all that stuff was the best. Some of them were completely clapped out, unsafe, way too expensive. It is what it is, but we had our eye on this one. So my mom worked her amazing magic, and 2 weeks later, I was surprised, blessed with this in the garage when I came home from school one day. Even though I wasn't really able to fully pay her back until I got my first job 3 years later. Mom, thank you once again. I love you. You got to give the credit to where it counts, of course. Obviously, she knows I appreciate it because here we are 10 years later, still shining. All right, so you know I got to get good at giving the people what they want. Have I had any problems with this 3.0 liter V6 Ranger? But before I talk about the issues, I have to explain a couple of things. Number one being the engine choices for, at least for the late 90s, early 2000s Rangers. You had a 2.3 four-cylinder, the 3.0 liter V6, and a slightly bigger 4.0 liter V6, which was basically the same amount of power either way you look at it. And then number two, before I get all kinds of criticism in the comments, the explanation regarding this specific Ranger as to why we are going to discuss what we're about to talk about. Due to my only and older siblings' living situations, especially around the time when we first got this truck, they were moving in and out of the state, and my mom wouldn't allow them to take their vehicle with them. So I would use their vehicle, and I was basically always able to keep this as a secondary. So this truck hasn't really been driven as much. In fact, I think I washed it more times than I've actually turn the key in the ignition, because sometimes I'd even push it, coast it out of the garage. I'm exaggerating, but the point is this truck hasn't really been driven as much as you would expect, because back in 2015 when we got this thing, it had 82,000 miles, Carfax proven, yes, even back then. So that would make it a 12-year-old truck with 82,000 miles on it. Right now on the odometer it has 104,000 miles on it. So about a whopping 22,000 miles in 10 years is a whole lot to me. Really the longest extended period of time I had to use this truck as a primary, I'm not really sure why. I'm assuming it was because my sibling's car was in the shop, obviously. It was probably back in 2018. This truck had like 92, something like that, 1,000 miles on it. It's when I got my first job, but I was still in school. It's about a 10-mile commute every day. And that is basically when the biggest problem I've had with this truck occurred. Previous day, it was fine. Drove it to school that next morning and let it sit for about 8 hours, came back and started the truck up. It was perfectly fine, but as soon as I put it into drive and put my foot on the accelerator, tried to move the truck, it literally felt like the engine and transmission both were spinning in circles in this thing. It was the biggest misfire of any misfires I've ever felt in the history of misfires. So me being 17, 18 with barely any tools, still didn't really know much about cars. I took it to Firestone and they replaced the spark plug wires and the spark plugs. Drove it down the street to put some gas in it and noticed that you could literally see the spark coming out of the spark plug hole on one of those cylinders over there on that side. So the next day I took it back to Firestone and they replaced that spark plug. They said it was a cracked spark plug that they put in there, or the technician put in there. You know how they don't like to, and of course it was under warranty because it wasn't even a day later. And then the truck still kept kind of misfiring. So I was like, you know what, I'll just take it to Goodyear. And then they diagnosed it again and they went ahead and replaced the coil pack, which you can see all these spark plug wires are leading into. And then eventually the problem went away after like 150 miles, which you can imagine that was quite some time because I barely drive this thing. But either way, not really sure what exactly solved the giant misfire problem. Everything else I'm about to list off, it's either been preventative maintenance or yeah, that's basically about it. Since I'm already in the engine bay, I might as well cover. Number one, since we're over here on this side, this is probably the second air filter I put in this truck just because it's pretty easy to do. I think it's kind of fun. You just pop these two little levers off right here, and then that slides out and you put a new air filter, at least for the engine bay, in there. And then the mass airflow sensor, I replaced this as well just because, you know, I've seen some videos and I was like, yeah, why not? And then this alternator has also been replaced. This was back when I used to work at a Ford dealership, just had discounts on parts, and I was just feeling like a mechanic, so I went ahead and did it, even though I didn't even make a how-to video. That was back then as well. Never touched anything with the AC system, still blowing freezing cold till this day. Got nice and clean washer fluid, radiator, coolant. Only change the oil about once a year and that's it. You don't want it to get too diluted. Transmission fluid, never changed that. It's still nice and bright red. That is probably like the third or fourth battery, I believe, since this truck sits so much. Now I'm actually charging the batteries. I flushed the coolant system out before, never touched anything with the radiator though, nothing like that. Since I'm looking at the brake booster and the brake fluid reservoir over there, I'll tell you a little story about the brake system on this truck. Woke up one day, went outside in the garage and noticed a little puddle underneath the rear passenger wheel over here. This truck has disc brakes in the front and drums in the rear. On the inside of the drum brakes, there's this little cylinder that pushes out the shoes and rubs up against the inside of the drum. Well, the shoes got so thin that the cylinder just poked its little, whatever you call those little things, the cylinder just poked out and just started leaking fluid. And that's what caused that brake fluid leak and resulted in a stuck brake light in the dash. And they fixed it for about like 600 something bucks and just told them to go ahead and do the entire brake system and flush out the whole system. But if you look deeper inside this engine bay over there on the driver's side, underneath the oil filter, that would be the third starter that we've replaced on this truck. I'm pretty sure the reason is because, you know, early 2000s Ford's electrical systems get kind of squirrely if you let them sit for a while. And the starters, thankfully AutoZone warranty, but they keep coming out almost as much as an oil change on this thing. Also on that side over there, since I'm looking at the power steering reservoir, I added some little alternative fluid to try to minimize the noise that these early 2000s Ford power steering pumps make. It's like a whine, especially when you lock the wheel all the way to the left or the right, you'll hear it. This one does it even with 104,000 miles on it. You can hear it. It doesn't do it right now. I think you have to drive it a little bit and then you'll start to hear that noise. And that fluid didn't really work, or at least not for very long. That was probably like 5 years ago, so you can't really judge it off of that. And that's all the activity as far as underneath the hood of this truck. It's just basically been preventative maintenance after that really huge misfire that came out of nowhere. Tried to drive away and it's just shaking like this. I'm like, what the? Also, since we're still under the hood, let's talk about upcoming repairs. We have a little tiny squeak right here, obviously, in the serpentine belt area of the truck. So we'll figure out what pulley or whatever the problem is that's causing that, and we'll deal with that. There's your look at underneath the hood of my 2004 Ford Ranger I've owned for 10 years and all the activity that's been going on down here. You can see it's sort of clean, not really, not as bad. I kind of just let it get to this point where it's dusty, but it's still kind of clean because I really don't want to be bothered to touch it. I've learned my lesson after the Taurus situation. I'm just gonna let stuff just kind of be dusty and dirty at this point. Don't really want to do any preventative maintenance anymore. Back to the exterior, we could talk about things that I've added, things that are broke, starting with the front. When we first got this truck, this was all factory. Figured out I wanted LEDs for this truck. So this is the clear lens right here on this side now, even though it's kind of starting to get a little yellow. I forgot where I even got these from, but time to replace these because they look ugly as they're kind of yellowing out. Or maybe I might go back to the original orange factory look. A switch back right here for the turn signal. And then we have an LED right here for the high beam, low beam. And then we have another little LED right here for the corner light. Here we have this nice bug deflector, which there was already one on this truck when we bought it, but I broke the original one because one day when I was done washing it, I backed it back into the garage and I was wiping off the front of it. A bug flew by. I tried to snap it with a towel and it ended up breaking off like this much of this half of it on the other side of the truck. So I replaced the whole thing. Same LED factory looking situation with the fog lights. I replaced this whole fog light assembly and put an LED bulb in there. This one is kind of loose, so I'm gonna have to deal with that. Now that we're down here at this angle, I just wanted us to take a moment to appreciate this wheel and tire combo. They don't make them like how they used to anymore. There's nothing like a really good 90s, early 2000s pickup truck wheel in general. You had a combination of this sparkly alloy, regular alloy, and then chrome right here in the middle. And then let's talk about these 15-inch rims, by the way. Let's talk about these tires. So the original tires that were on this truck when we purchased it back in 2015 were so old, dated all the way back to '09. They were BF Goodrich KOs. They don't even make the KOs anymore. They make the KO2s now. So as I was shopping around for the BF Goodrich KO2 tires, because I like the white wall lettering, I realized, why spend all that money on a tire that's really going to sit and dry rot just like the last set of tires that were already on this truck? So I figured I would go with some cheaper, nice looking wheels just without the white wall lettering. And ironically, they say Ranger on these what are these? Thunders, whatever. Don't even know, never heard of these off-brand, I guess, type tires, but they look good. Nothing too much to discuss about this particular angle of this truck, except this tonneau cover. I don't know if it's factory or not, probably not, but it was already on this truck when we purchased it. And then these side steps, I don't know if these are factory or not, but it was already on this truck when we purchased it. And then these sun visors right here on the driver and passenger window, basically the same situation as the bug deflector up front on the hood. I broke it. I forgot exactly how with these, but I had to replace them. Actually, there is something pretty funny and important to talk about with this angle. I just zoomed in the camera lens a little bit. So if you notice, this bumper right here is pushed in. This was already on the truck when we were looking at it, when we got it way back in 2015. I still have the original, at least a screenshot from somebody's phone on the website where this truck was listed, and this was on there, and I just kept it ever since. It just kind of stuck with me, and I just like how it's been there the whole time, even though it kind of looks ugly when you actually take a look at it. Somebody backed into something or whatever, but this was already on the truck when we were looking at it, and I still have the original proof of it being here. And that's just how weird I am. I don't know. Here we are at the direct rear of the truck. Same situation with the taillight assembly. I wanted a sort of kind of factory look, not really, but having the LEDs in there. So this is a nice smoked barbecue, almost barbecue sauce red. Then you got your LEDs right here, nice little circle reflector, and then one giant LED bulb up there to the top for your reverse light. Shout out to my dad. This was probably like the very first accessory that we put on this truck, a 2-ball hitch right here. There was also a receiver down here. If you can see from this angle, you're about to see in a second, chrome exhaust tip. This was already here when we bought it as well. Of course, I put the LED plate lights, and then we have an LED third brake light way up there to the top as well. And then this was already here when we got the truck too, but I don't think it's factory. It's like a little aftermarket lock for the tailgate. I don't think any of these Rangers from the 90s and 2000s had locks on the actual tailgate handle like this. But speaking of the tailgate handle, this was a funny story. This thing actually broke on me. This was a while back, maybe like 2016, 17 type days. I just pulled up to a friend's house, and they wanted to use the bed of the truck as leverage, I guess, to climb up to a basketball goal and do something to it. Maybe put a new hoop, new whatever on it. And I was like, sure. So I tried to pull the tailgate open, and it just snapped right off. So I had to buy maybe like another $30 handle and then take off the inside of the tailgate and fix that. I did that myself, but funny little story since we're talking about the tailgate area. And I cannot open this. I do not want to open this tailgate in bed right now because there's actually more stuff than you think. I got 2 covers for this truck. I put one on top of the other, and then I also have a 3-ton low profile jack back there, some jack stands and stuff, kind of like storage back here right now. So I don't really want to open it up and move all that stuff out of the way. This truck also came with mud flaps, at least 2 of them for the rear wheels when we got it, but they were just so faded and old and ugly and cracked that you could barely even read out the words Ranger that were on there. So I went in and threw them away. I know it's very hard for me to just detach myself from those mud flaps, but speaking of other things that I threw away that this truck came with, at least when we bought it, previous owner left some ratcheting poles, I guess it's kind of to support your loads in the rear of the truck. But I left this truck outside at my dad's house for about 8 months, and it basically rusted all that stuff, and the inside of the bed was pretty brown. So I went ahead and threw all that metal and all that stuff away. and no more of those. They were just done, cooked. So the last two issues with this truck would have to be the fuel pump situation. If you ever try to crank your vehicle and it just crank, takes a while to crank over, it typically means that your fuel pump or fuel pump assembly is bad. So like I mentioned earlier, when I left this truck sitting over my dad's house for about 8 or 9 months, it basically just initially killed it because this truck was already having a hard time starting up. So since I didn't have the tools necessary to do so, I called a mobile mechanic and he took care of that for me. He took the drive shaft off to have better access to the fuel tank and took the whole fuel tank down and replaced that whole assembly. And you know, I think that's an easier situation than having to take off the bed. We get it from the top. But either way, we got that taken care of. And now there's a new fuel pump assembly, as I've already mentioned in my previous Ranger video. And the last would have to be a preventative maintenance situation, all 4 shocks. So this truck is a actual real truck. You can see the separation between the bed and the cab. So it does have leaf springs and shocks in the rear, and then an independent shock suspension setup in the front. So we replaced all 4 shocks. This was probably about 7 years ago, but this thing rides like a brick regardless of what you do to it. So just get ready to feel like you're in a street legal go-kart whenever you ride in one of these Rangers. And that is everything as far as the maintenance under the hood, front, rear, exterior, underneath the bed of the truck. But let's take a moment to appreciate the interior of this Ranger. Like, let's start off with the memories. No, I'm not talking about those memories, you fools. I was a good kid. Mama was mad as fuck if I didn't come home 4 hours before the streetlights came on. Not even a follicle of weed touched these lungs until I was like 20, whenever my friends would come around and have like an extra roach or whatever. But I wished more vehicles had the durability and the just simplicity of this interior. Let's start off with the amazing vinyl flooring, the type of flooring. This is not carpet. All you got to do is just have a wet, damp towel and wipe it off, and it looks just as good as new. The only other vehicle I've ever owned that had this floor was my 2022 Ram 1500 Classic, and it was just great, dude. Just no carpet. It just, no orders or nothing trapped inside of the base of the floor, whatever. It's just, this is just such a much better, I wish more cars offered this, but really it's only like base model work trucks and stuff like that. And then also, these are some different types of seats. I think these are original, I hope they are, but these are not like, these are more of a sportier kind of bucket, squared off kind of seat going on. You could just see how clean they are. Things that you need to know about in here is I've had this headliner replaced. It used to be gray just like these sun visors, but I didn't know if I wanted to go with the Galaxy headliner at some point. Still don't have it to this day, but it looks nice with this black going on up here. This is not the factory headliner, even though I think it was sagging in the back just a little bit. But the floor mats and the steering wheel cover were like the very first upgrade, at least as far as the interior goes, like the next day. As far as tint goes, I forgot, I think this is all 5% on the rear and then 15% on the driver and passenger door. Speaking of doors, yes, this is only a 2-door, even though it is an extended cab. Yes, we do have the awesome sideways facing little seats that look like speakers, even though the speakers are actually just above that on the wall. Sounds like a tank when you close it. Only thing in here that's powered is basically the exterior mirrors. Everything else is manual, like these seats, which is totally fine. So there is your 10-year anniversary look at my very first car in the sheet metal, all that. If you're new to this channel, you probably don't know, haven't seen much about this truck, but I've already made at least probably like 10 videos of this, my very first car. You might call me weird, crazy, or stupid for having just this thing basically sitting around all this time for what? But when you're this passionate, you have this much of a thing for cars, what it actually means is deeper than what it seems. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. That's it.